Today, we will use a scientific perspective to explore the complex truth behind meteorological events. According to the latest news from the Fox News website in the United States, on December 5th, continuous rainfall brought by a strong storm codenamed Pineapple Express hit the Pacific Northwest, causing rivers to overflow and the Washington state area to suffer severe flooding. Neighborhoods, roads, and highways were flooded from the Pacific coast to the Cascade foothills, and at least 2 people died in flooding in Oregon. Video from along the Tirraguamish River in Washington state showed water pouring into homes, across roads and vehicles trying to cross floodwaters as the river reached record levels. The U.S. 13th Coast Guard said people were trapped in floodwaters near Roseburg, Washington. The crew from Astoria Air Station arrived aboard an MH-60 Jayhawk. Helicopter crews rescued 4 people who were trapped in their home, which was surrounded by at least 4 feet of water. They also rescued a man who was trapped on top of a truck by floodwaters. All victims were taken to hospital and are currently in stable condition. Emergency crews have been warning drivers to avoid driving on water-covered roads, but some people have ignored the warnings and become trapped. Thank you for liking, leaving comments, subscribing, and turning on the little bell. We will update every day. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office said they needed to rescue a driver near Savannah who became stranded after driving around a road closure sign. The Washington State Patrol said troopers had responded to more than a dozen crashes in Snohomish County since midnight, where water was standing in several areas. Ball, a hydrologist with the National Weather Service, said that the cause of this storm and flooding has been identified. Western Washington state is adjacent to the Pacific Ocean and 2 mountain ranges. When encountering storms from Canada, it will become drier and the air passing over the mountains will increase. Rainfall rate. Rivers in western Washington state, such as the Stillaguamish River, gather speed as they flow down steep slopes before flowing into the flat tidal areas near Puget Sound. When floodwater meets salt water, dramatic changes in elevation can cause water to pool and have nowhere to go. Meanwhile, melting lowland snow is causing river levels to rise further. Another storm is expected to move into Washington and Oregon, bringing more rain along the coast and snowstorms in the mountains. In fact, storms and floods of various sizes have occurred frequently all over the world in recent years, not just in the United States. Such events have brought huge trouble and trauma to our lives. First, floods often submerge people's homes and cause casualties, especially vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, and the disabled. Floods can also contaminate drinking water sources and cause the spread of diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. Floods can also cause people psychological stress and trauma, affecting their mental health. Secondly, floods will damage infrastructure such as roads, bridges, electricity, communications, etc., affecting transportation and production. Floods can also cause losses to crops and livestock, resulting in insufficient supplies of food and meat, leading to rising prices and famine. Floods can also lead to the loss of property and assets, increase poverty and inequality, and trigger social unrest and conflict. Then, floods will cause environmental and ecological damage. Floods will change the flow and water quality of rivers and affect the survival of aquatic life. Floods can also wash away soil and vegetation, causing soil erosion and desertification. Floods can also carry away garbage and toxic substances, pollute land and waters, and threaten the health of humans and animals. When we encounter a flood, we should take some measures to protect our own safety. First, you should pay attention to the weather forecast to understand the possibility and severity of flooding. If there is a flood warning, low-lying areas along rivers and lakes, as well as river valleys, beaches, and other places prone to flash floods should be evacuated as soon as possible. You should choose a safe route and avoid crossing or wading through floods, as there may be dangerous factors such as undercurrents, whirlpools, and floating objects in the floods. You should also avoid getting close to high-voltage power lines or broken wires to prevent electric shock. Secondly, some necessities should be prepared, such as food, drinking water, warm clothes, medicines, communication equipment, etc., in case of emergency. You should also collect some buoyant materials, such as rafts, tubs, barrels, foam plastics, etc., to make life-saving equipment for transfer or rescue on the water. You should also prepare some signaling equipment, such as whistles, flashlights, flags, bright sheets, etc., to send a distress signal to the outside world in case of distress. More importantly, if you are trapped by floods, you should stay calm, quickly judge the surrounding environment, and move to higher ground or a building with a strong structure as soon as possible. If you have a communication device, you should use it to report your location and situation to the local government and flood control department and seek rescue. If there is no communication equipment, you should use the signaling equipment you have prepared, wave brightly colored clothing back and forth, or collectively call for help to make it easier for rescuers to find you. If there is life-saving equipment, you can use it to transfer on the water, but do not swim to escape, nor climb live telegraph poles, iron towers, or climb to the roof of a mud house. What cannot be ignored is that if you are caught in a flood, you should try your best to grab something fixed or floating and look for opportunities to escape. You should try to keep your body balanced and avoid being washed away or hit by the current. You should avoid swallowing floodwater as it may contain pollutants or germs. You should try to keep your breathing as smooth as possible to avoid suffocation or choking on water. Also try to maintain body temperature to avoid hypothermia or frostbite. In addition, if you successfully escape, you should check the physical condition of yourself and others in time, and deal with wounds or diseases in time. Change into clean clothes promptly to keep your body dry and warm. Try to replenish nutrition and water in time to restore physical strength and spirit. Contact family or friends as soon as possible to inform them of your safety. At the same time, participate in post-disaster psychological counseling to relieve psychological stress and trauma. Flood levels are usually measured by indicators such as frequency, duration, scope, depth, flow velocity, and peak flow. Different flood types, such as river floods, coastal floods, flash floods, etc., may require different measurement methods and standards. For river floods, the return period of floods can generally be calculated based on historical flood data, that is, the average interval between occurrences of a certain flood. The longer the return period, the smaller the probability and the higher the severity of flooding. For example, a flood that returns once in 100 years means that the probability of occurrence is 1% every year, which is more serious than a flood that returns once in 10 years, which has a probability of 10%. For coastal floods, the danger and destructive power of floods can generally be assessed based on indicators such as seawater rise, rise speed, duration, and coverage. For example, storm surge is an abnormal rise in seawater caused by strong winds and changes in air pressure. Its amplitude and speed are related to wind speed, wind direction, air pressure, tide, and other factors. The greater the magnitude and speed of the storm surge, the greater the severity of the flood. For flash floods, the dynamic danger level of floods can generally be judged based on indicators such as flood depth, flow velocity, and water surface rise rate. These indicators affect the stability of people's actions in floods and also reflect the impact and scouring power of floods. For example, inundation depth refers to the height at which floodwater submerges the ground, flow velocity refers to the speed of floodwater movement, and water surface rise rate refers to the speed at which floodwater levels rise. The larger these indicators are, the greater the severity of the flood. According to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, from 2000 to 2019, 3,440 floods occurred around the world, killing nearly 600,000 people, affecting more than 3.6 billion people, and causing direct economic losses of $944 billion. In recent years, the frequency and intensity of global floods have shown an upward trend, causing people's attention and concern. There are many reasons for the frequent occurrence of floods around the world. First, climate change is one of the leading causes of global flooding. Scientists have found that due to global warming caused by greenhouse gases emitted by human activities, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere has increased, resulting in increased rainfall, especially the frequency and intensity of extreme rainfall events. Second, these extreme rainfall events often exceed local drainage capacity, causing flooding. For example, in July 2021, Western Europe suffered a rare heavy rainstorm. The rainfall reached historical extremes, triggering severe floods, killing hundreds of people, affecting millions, and destroying thousands of houses. What's more, climate change will also cause sea levels to rise, increasing the risk of flooding in coastal areas. According to a report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, global average sea levels rose by approximately 19 centimeters during the 20th century, and sea level rise is expected to increase annual flood losses by hundreds of billions of dollars worldwide by the end of this century. It is worth noting that land use changes are another important cause of global flooding. With the growth of population and urbanization, natural vegetation around the world has been cut down in large quantities, and land has been reclaimed, constructed, and paved, forming a large number of impermeable surfaces, such as asphalt, cement, rubble, etc. These impermeable surfaces reduce the infiltration capacity of the soil, increase surface runoff, and reduce groundwater recharge, leading to the occurrence and intensification of floods. For example, according to one study, the global population at risk from floods increased by 24% from 2000 to 2015, with more than half of this caused by land use changes. Another study found that global urbanization increased from 37% to 52% from 1970 to 2010, resulting in a 3.1-fold increase in flood frequency. In addition, land use changes will also affect the hydrological cycle, change the spatial and temporal distribution of rainfall, and increase the uncertainty and randomness of floods. What is often overlooked is that the construction and management of water conservancy facilities is another important factor affecting global floods. Water conservancy facilities, such as reservoirs, dams, rivers, drainage systems, etc., are projects built by humans to utilize and control water resources. Water conservancy facilities can regulate water volume and reduce the impact of floods to a certain extent, but they may also bring some negative effects. On the one hand, the construction of water conservancy facilities will change the hydrology and landforms, destroy the ecological balance, affect the hydrological process, and cause the occurrence and intensification of floods. For example, the storage of water in reservoirs will reduce the sediment transport capacity of downstream rivers, lead to riverbed siltation, reduce the flow and velocity of rivers, and increase the risk of flooding. On the other hand, poor management of water conservancy facilities can also cause floods to occur and intensify. If the scheduling of the reservoir is unreasonable, it may cause the reservoir to break or release floods, causing flooding downstream. Insufficient maintenance of the drainage system may lead to blockage or damage of the drainage system, causing urban waterlogging. In addition, socioeconomic factors are also an important factor affecting global floods. Socioeconomic factors mainly include population density, poverty level, education level, disaster awareness, response capabilities, etc. These factors influence people's exposure, vulnerability, and adaptability to flooding, and thus the losses and consequences of flooding. Generally speaking, the higher the population density, the higher the poverty level, the lower the education level, the poorer disaster awareness, and the weaker the coping ability, the more serious the losses and consequences of floods. For example, according to one study from 2000 to 2015, nearly half of the world's population at risk from floods belong to low-income countries, which have relatively low flood risk management capabilities and are therefore more vulnerable to floods. Thank you for liking, leaving a message, subscribing, and turning on the little bell. We will update the latest news from around the world every day. Continue to use a scientific perspective to explore the complex truth behind meteorological events.